Okay, so hopefully you found that kind of interesting. Up next is we're going to talk about beats. And basically, beats are when two sound waves that are close in frequency approach your ear and they actually interfere with one another to create an alternating loud and soft sound. And this is actually, again, a result of constructive and destructive interference. Those of you that are really into music, one of the reasons they spend some time, or musicians, I should say, spend some time tuning their instruments is because if one person's instrument is a little bit out of tune, you'll get beats being created, which kind of makes this woo 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 sound whenever you're holding a note because someone is a little bit out of tune, and so you get these what they're called beats. Um, so if I were to draw or create a graphic of beats, here's kind of what it looks like. The red is one specific sound wave, and the blue is another specific sound wave, and they're a little bit different from one another. Their frequency is a little bit off from one another. If I were to overlap these two waves, the red and blue, it would look kind of like this bottom part here. And notice in the green sections, that's where you have the overlapping of the red and blue, where a crest meets a crest or a trough meets a trough, and you have constructive interference. It's going to make it sound louder. And so wherever there's a green section, you're going to have this kind of beat pattern where you're going to get a loud noise, right here, loud noise, then a softer noise, loud noise, softer noise, loud noise repeating over and over again. A demonstration of this can be done with speakers where you basically get them a little bit out of tune from one another. So I'll let this gentleman show you guys what beats sound like so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about.
Now I'd like to move over to my function generators. These produce sine tones of whatever frequency I specify. Right now I have them set up to play 220 hertz each, which is an A. It's the note A natural. And if I play these both at the same time, they will sound the same. So here's one, and the other one is the same. And if I play them both at the same time, you won't hear anything. But what we know about beats is that when we make these two different, you'll hear the beats, and the beat frequency is equal to the difference in the two frequencies. So if I set one of these to 222 hertz and one of them to 220, then the beat frequency will be 2. You'll hear 2 beats every second. So let's actually try that. I'm going to take this here and adjust the frequency so it's exactly 222. The difference will be 2 hertz, and we'll hear the beats very exactly. When the beats start coming, you can check the clock on YouTube and make sure that there are 2 of these swells every second. Every second that passes, you'll hear it beat twice. So here we go. That's 222. So let that play for a few seconds. So hopefully that's audible. Check to make sure the timing is right. And I can manipulate that further. I can make this 221 so the beats are slower. Now we have 1 every second. I can set the difference to whatever I like. So if I make this one 223, whoops. We have 223 coming out of here, and 220 coming out of here. So that beat frequency is 3 hertz. We hear 3 of these things every second. Or I can make it 5 if I want. Becoming much quicker, and eventually I can make them, if I keep turning this one up, I can make them come so quickly that they'll be harder and harder to resolve, and the notes will be more and more out of tune, so it'll be less pleasant. I can make it like 230, so 230, 220, we have 10 beats a second. You can see the effect. The farther apart these are in frequency, the more frequent these beats are.
All right, cool. So that's an example of beats. The next thing I would like to talk about is something called the Doppler effect. And this is probably, of the concepts we've talked about today, the biggest one to take away and what will show up most likely or most frequently on the test next week is this idea of the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect is the apparent change in frequency, not the actual change, the apparent change in frequency of a sound wave due to the relative velocity between the observer and the source. So basically what the Doppler effect is if someone is moving relative to a source of sound, they're going to hear a different change in frequency. And basically, remember, a change in frequency causes a change in pitch. So it may sound more high-pitched or it may sound more low-pitched depending upon the relative motion of the person or sound source. So if we take a look at these bullet points down here, if you are approaching an object that's making a sound, or if an object is making a sound that's approaching you, the frequency will be higher, and so thus a higher frequency means that you're going to hear a higher pitched sound than what's actually being produced, and it'll have a shorter wavelength. If the object is moving away from you, the frequency will be lower, and it will have a longer wavelength, and so thus the pitch will sound lower. The faster the object moves, the more shifting that will occur, the greater the change in the frequency. All right, so that's pretty complex, don't get me wrong, but I have some graphics to help make you help you understand this concept, along with 2 different videos to help explain it as well. So first we're going to start with, when sound is made by a stationary object, you hear a certain frequency. So let's say I'm just standing in the middle of the street, and I'm this dot right here in the center, and I just start to scream a single note, one single pitch. These circles, basically radiating out from this center point right here, would be sound waves spreading out in all directions. I'm stationary. I'm not moving at all. I'm just sitting here holding one note in the middle of the street. Let's say I were to start to run. What would my sound waves look like as I run? Well, this is still me, that black little dot in the center. As I run from left to right, notice that if I'm moving in the rightward direction, so let me get my pen out here. If I'm moving in the rightward direction this way, notice the wave fronts are getting compressed. They're getting smaller. And so the wavelength is actually getting smaller between crest to crest, or in this case, compression to compression. And so if you have a smaller wavelength, the frequency becomes higher. So anyone standing in this area here is going to hear a higher pitched sound than what I'm actually producing. So just for fun, let's say I'm screaming a note at 400 hertz. Someone standing here might hear 445 for the frequency. That's not actually what I'm producing, but it's what they perceive it as. Whereas someone who's standing behind me as I run away from them, let's say they're standing in this section, notice the waves are getting more stretched. So there's a larger wavelength and a lower frequency, and so therefore they would perceive the sound to be lower than 400 hertz. They might hear, say, 430 hertz, and it would sound lower to them. Okay? So that's what the Doppler effect basically is this change in the perceived frequency. A real good example of this is if any of you have ever been standing on the side of the road as an ambulance drives by, or if you ever actually watched NASCAR as the cars whip around the track, you hear the change in sound, like the engine sound is changing as it drives around the track. The same is true with this ambulance. As it approaches this person here on this side on the right, they're going to perceive the sound to be a higher frequency than, say, the person who has the ambulance moving away from them. They're going to perceive it as a lower frequency. I think these guys right here explain this really well, so I'm going to let them go through what the Doppler effect is with you, and hopefully this will kind of help solidify everything together.
Road, when a fast sports car drives by you, making a sound kind of like that. So the sound is higher as it's coming towards you, and it's lower as it's moving away from you. So there's some interesting interaction between sound and motion, which we call the Doppler effect.
The first thing we need to understand is sound. Now, sound is actually just a bunch of pulses being sent through the air, and you can feel that really easily. Just go like this.
So to make that funny noise, Josh is sending air through his lips, which are then bouncing off each other at some rate. If you look closely, you can see it. You can also hear the sound that he's making.
Now, if you squeeze your lips together tighter, then they bounce against each other faster, like this.
And as they're bouncing faster, a faster rate of vibration means that the pitch that you hear is higher. So how does motion come into this? Well, imagine that your friend is standing over here throwing snowballs at you one by one. Now, which would you rather have? Your friend just standing there throwing snowballs at you, or running towards you, throwing snowballs at you at the same rate? So even if he's throwing the snowballs at the same rate, you receive more of them if he's coming towards you.
And if your friend's running away from you throwing the balls, you're even happier because you'll get hit less and less often.
So this same phenomenon happens with sound. People had discovered this theoretically, but there's no really easy way to test this because back in the 1800s, there weren't any fast cars to just drive by you and hear this.
Yeah, you didn't have this. I mean, it happens to us every day, but in 1840, it never happened until railroads were being built. There was a new train line from Utrecht to Amsterdam, and so this guy Buys Ballot decided to test this idea about sound by putting a bunch of trumpet players on a train.
So what that does is that they play a certain pitch while they're riding on the train. That's guaranteed to be the same pitch the whole train ride, and you can put somebody on the ground and listen as the train goes by and hear the pitch shift.
Now, we still have trumpets,
Luckily,
like this one.
Josh plays the trumpet.
But instead of using a train, we're going to use a car.
First, we'll ride with the trumpet to see how it sounds. Now, we'll listen to the trumpet as it drives by. Finally, let's hear the constant pitch emitted by the trumpet together with the Doppler shift heard from the roadside.
So one interesting thing to notice happens from our experimental setup. So here's the road. Car was driving by here, and we were standing very close to the road right there. So what we heard is a pitch shift that happened very fast, like this. So the pitch is only changing in this area right here. Now if we were standing a little farther away from the road, we would hear the pitch change happen much more gradually, like this. It would start and end at the same pitches, but the change would happen over a much longer period of time.
The other really interesting thing about the Doppler effect is that it works for light, too.
And in fact, that was Doppler's original motivation for studying this effect.
And with light, instead of the pitch changing, the color changes. And the Doppler effect is called the red shift, often. And the red shift is the reason we know that the universe is expanding. Check that out.
Hey, Sheldon, there's something I want to talk to you about before we go to the party.
I don't care if anybody gets it. I'm going as the Doppler effect.
No, it's not.
If I have to, I can demonstrate. Meow.
Hey, what's Sheldon supposed to be?
Oh, he's the Doppler effect.
Yes. It's the apparent change in the frequency of a wave caused by relative motion between the source of the wave and the observer. It's the apparent change in the frequency of a wave caused by relative motion between the source of the wave and the observer. It's the apparent change in the frequency of a wave caused by relative motion between the source of the wave and the observer.
Oh, sure, I see it now. The Doppler effect.